At 3:13 a.m. on the morning of November 14, 1992, a phone began to ring in the cramped office of the Oakwood Apartments, a modest two-story complex on the outskirts of Millbrook, Oregon. The building, constructed in 1971, sat on a quiet corner of Oakwood Drive, flanked by a row of mature elms that swayed in the cold November rain. The night was typical for the Pacific Northwest in late autumn. Temperatures hovered around 38 degrees, and a steady drizzle had been falling since midnight, turning the asphalt parking lot into a glistening mirror under the amber glow of the streetlights. The call was answered by Ada Williams, the apartment manager, who lived on the ground floor in Unit 1A. Williams, a widow in her early 60s, was accustomed to late-night calls, often from tenants locked out or reporting minor disturbances, but this one was different. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice sleepy but alert. "Oakwood Apartments," she said. There was a pause and then a voice spoke. It was a male voice, calm and measured, with a slight rasp that suggested either a cold or a lifelong habit of smoking. The words were distinct, each one delivered with deliberate precision. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" the voice said. Ada Williams frowned, her hand tightening on the receiver. "I'm sorry, who is this?" she asked, now fully awake. The line crackled with static, and for a moment she thought she heard breathing, slow, rhythmic, before the caller spoke again. "You're going to pay," the voice said, and then the line went dead. Williams sat for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear, the dial tone humming softly. She glanced at the clock on her nightstand. 3:14 a.m. The call had lasted exactly 47 seconds. She thought about calling the police, but the caller had not threatened her directly, and she assumed it was a wrong number or a prank. She set the phone down and returned to sleep, the rain tapping against her window like a distant drum. 8 hours later, at 6:30 a.m., Ada Williams knocked on the door of apartment 4B. She had not seen Maggie Thompson, the tenant, that morning, which was unusual. Thompson, a 29-year-old nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, was known for her punctuality. She typically left for work by 6:15 a.m., her silver Honda Civic pulling out of the parking lot with a soft purr. But today, the car remained in its spot, and there was no sign of movement behind the frosted glass of her door. Williams knocked again, louder this time. "Maggie, are you in there?" Silence. She tried the handle. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open slightly, peering into the dim interior. "Maggie," she called. What she saw next would stay with her for the rest of her life. Maggie Thompson was lying on the floor of her living room, motionless. Williams screamed, a sound that echoed down the hallway and brought neighbors running. Within minutes, the police arrived, followed by paramedics who confirmed what everyone already feared. Maggie Thompson was dead. The investigation began immediately. Officers from the Millbrook Police Department, led by Detective Harold Vance, a veteran of 22 years, secured the scene and began the painstaking process of collecting evidence. The apartment was small but neatly furnished. A couch, a coffee table, a television, a kitchenette separated by a half wall. Thompson's body was found near the couch, lying on her side, one arm outstretched. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. The door had been unlocked, which suggested that Thompson had either left it open herself or had known her attacker. The forensic team, led by Dr. Emily Ross, a forensic pathologist with the state police, examined the scene. Thompson had no visible injuries on her exposed skin, but upon closer inspection, they found faint bruising on her neck, consistent with strangulation. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, but the manner was unclear. There were no weapons found, no DNA under her fingernails, no evidence of a struggle. It was as if she had been taken by surprise, perhaps even from behind. But the most puzzling piece of evidence was the phone call. Detective Vance learned from Ada Williams that a call had been made to the apartment office at 3:13 a.m., and he immediately audited the phone records for apartment 4B. What he found was startling. The call had not originated from within the building or from Maggie's own phone. It had come from a public payphone located at the corner of Oakwood Drive and Elm Street, approximately 200 feet from the apartment complex. The call had been placed at 3:13 a.m. and had lasted 47 seconds, the same duration as the call Williams had received. But there was a complication. The payphone at Oakwood and Elm had been out of service for 3 weeks due to vandalism. The phone company had confirmed that the receiver had been damaged and the line disconnected. Yet the call had been logged in the system as originating from that number. It made no sense. Vance ordered the phone company to check the records again, but the data was unequivocal. The call had come from that payphone, at that time, on that date. The police then turned to the recording. Ada Williams had not recorded the call, but Maggie Thompson had an answering machine attached to her phone line. The machine, a bulky Panasonic device common in the early 1990s, had recorded the incoming call. Detective Vance played it back, his face grim. The voice was male, calm, and unsettling in its precision. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" It said. "Then, you're going to pay." There was no background noise, no indication of location. The voice analysis, conducted by the state FBI branch, determined that the speaker was likely Caucasian, between the ages of 30 and 45, with a deep vocal register. But the sample was too short for a definitive match. The investigation then expanded to Maggie Thompson's life. Who was she? What might have prompted a threat like that? Thompson was born in 1963 in Eugene, Oregon, and had moved to Millbrook in 1990 to take a position as a registered nurse at St. Mary's. She was described by colleagues as dedicated, quiet, and private. She had no known enemies, no history of domestic violence, no criminal record. She had ended a relationship with a man named James Hartley 6 months prior, but Hartley, a soft-spoken accountant, denied any involvement and passed a polygraph test. He alibied for the night of the murder, claiming he was at home watching television. The police also looked into Thompson's professional life. As a nurse, she had access to sensitive information, including patient records, but there was no evidence that she had mishandled any data or that any patient had complained. Her supervisor, director of nursing Barbara Collins, described Thompson as meticulous and above reproach. Meanwhile, the witness accounts began to pour in. Ada Williams, the manager, told detectives that she had seen a man standing near the payphone on Oakwood Drive around 2:30 a.m. on the night of the murder. She described him as tall, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. She had paid little attention at the time, assuming he was a resident or a visitor. But now, his presence took on new significance. Another neighbor, David Palmer, who lived in apartment 4A, directly adjacent to Thompson, reported hearing a loud thud around 3:30 a.m. He thought it was the sound of a door closing or perhaps a pipe in the wall, so he did not investigate. He went back to sleep and learned of the murder only the next morning. A third resident, a young woman named Teresa Luo, said she had been driving home from a late shift at a local diner around 3:00 a.m. and had passed the payphone on Oakwood Drive. She noticed a man standing there, talking on the phone. He was of average build, she said, and he was wearing a navy blue windbreaker. She did not see his face, but she remembered the phone booth's light was on, casting a yellow glow on his hands. She thought nothing of it at the time. The police compiled a composite sketch based on the descriptions from Williams and Luo, but it yielded no leads. The man seemed to have vanished. In the weeks that followed, the investigation hit a series of dead ends. The fingerprints lifted from the payphone matched no one in the local database. The voice recording was sent to the FBI's voice analysis unit, but they could only offer a profile, not a name. The phone company's explanation for the call remained unsatisfactory. An out-of-service phone had somehow placed a call, and no one could explain how. The company suggested it might have been a glitch, but Detective Vance was not convinced. In December 1992, the case went cold. The Millbrook Police Department, lacking new leads, shifted its focus to other matters. Maggie Thompson's family held a memorial service, and her body was buried in a small cemetery in Eugene, next to her parents. The case file was sealed and placed in the basement of the police station, gathering dust, but the mystery of the midnight caller refused to fade. In 2001, a journalist named Mark Sullivan, working for the Millbrook Tribune, wrote a feature article on unsolved cases in the county. The article included a section on Thompson's murder, highlighting the strange phone call and the impossible payphone record. The piece sparked renewed interest, and the police department reopened the case, assigning Detective Sarah Moss, a younger officer with a reputation for persistence, to review the evidence. Moss spent months re-examining the files. She interviewed Williams again, who had since moved to a retirement community in Florida. She tracked down James Hartley, who had remarried and moved to Washington state. She even contacted the phone company, now a different corporation after a merger, to request the original records, but nothing new emerged. In 2015, the case was submitted to the state's Cold Case Unit, which had access to advanced DNA technology. Forensic scientists re-examined the evidence, focusing on a single hair found on Thompson's couch. The hair, which had been overlooked in the original investigation, yielded a partial DNA profile. It was entered into the national database, but it did not match any known offender. The case remained unsolved. In 2018, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A man named Robert Klein, now 67, was arrested in Idaho for a series of assaults on women in the 1990s. Klein, a drifter with a history of violence, had lived in the Pacific Northwest during the early 1990s. The FBI, comparing his voice to the recording from 1992, found similarities, but not a definitive match. Klein denied any involvement in Thompson's murder, and no charges were filed. He died in prison in 2020, taking the secret to his grave if he had one. Today, the case of Maggie Thompson remains open. The Oakwood apartments have been demolished, replaced by a strip mall and a coffee shop. The payphone on Oakwood Drive is gone, removed in the early 2000s as cell phones became ubiquitous. The recording of the call is still stored in the evidence vault, a ghostly voice preserved on a magnetic tape that grows more fragile with each passing year. Detectives have revisited the case several times, but the questions persist. Who was the man on the phone? How did the call originate from an out-of-service payphone? What did he mean when he said, "You thought you could get away with it"? Was it a random act, or did it stem from something in Maggie Thompson's past? Was it related to her work, her relationships, or something else entirely? Maggie Thompson's sister, Patricia, has never stopped searching for answers. She keeps a photo of Maggie on her mantle, a reminder of the sister who loved to garden and bake chocolate chip cookies, who volunteered at the local animal shelter, and who dreamed of one day opening a clinic for underprivileged children. "Someone knows something," Patricia said in a recent interview. "Someone has always known, and I will never stop hoping that they will come forward." As for the call at 3:13 a.m., it remains an enigma, a voice from the darkness that spoke of secrets and payment and then vanished. In the quiet hours of the night, when the wind moves through the empty spaces where the apartments once stood, some say you can still hear the faint hum of a dial tone, waiting for an answer that may never come.